pictures myself, some of the images, so I'm going to come round here and we'll see what we can do. We're trusting to luck, by the way. There's one rogue image in this, one rogue slide, and every time we try to bring it up, everything falls apart. But anyway, I've asked my elderly son-in-law to sit down. Well, you sit down. Anyway, let's not mess about it. Howth has always been unfashionable. We're absolutely tops in unfashionability. This is Greenville Collins' chart from 1692, and it just gives you some sense of the isolation. And again, this actually was provided by Ian Malcolm, who's done just about everything, including bringing the Primula up from Mount Shannon. And he happened to have this chart, so I said, can I borrow that for a minute? And about 6 weeks later, I returned it, having copied it every which way, totally illegally, but anyway, never mind. And of course, the first thing you notice is Howth is an island. In fact, of course, Howth is much more older than Ireland. We regard Ireland as the Johnny-come-lately sort of place. The rocks of Howth are 600 million years old. The rocks of Ireland are only 300 million years old. This could disappear tomorrow. But anyway, just looking at this chart, I suddenly noticed, go on to the next one, Brian, will be nice. Over on the left is something everybody's forgotten about. There used to be a Clontarf Island. It was there, I'm quite serious, I'm not making this up. It was there until, this is the first diversion, we're going to get lost everywhere in this show. But it was there until about 1840, then it got washed away. 2 people, in fact, were drowned off it. But it built up again as shingle, and was in fact, we see the next one just to show you. There you are, that's a painting of Mud Island, as it was called, or Clontarf Island, in 1870 by Alexander Williams, whose painting hangs over the fireplace. You've probably seen that as well. And but what happened was a great road building program got going in Dublin in the 1870s, and of course the fellows found they could just drive their horses and carts out to the island. It was made of shingle. So in the course of the road building, the island, Clontarf Island, disappeared and has never come back since. But that's absolutely nothing to do with the Boyds and Howth, so we better move on. The isolation of Howth is emphasized again in this. If you, in fact, they talk about Howth as being north side. There's no such thing, we're east side. If you draw the magnetic north-south line through Sutton Cross, it passes east of Dalkey. So we're the east side, and the Bailey is the upper east side. And where the Bronx is, I don't know. Anyway, we had a harbour built here. If we go on to the next. That's, don't try to read it sideways, you're used to seeing it that way up. If you look carefully, he's done it to me. If you look carefully, you will see there's no harbour whatever at Howth, and they actually have markers, permanent markers, showing the way into Baldoyle Creek. Baldoyle was the main harbour, and it was a natural harbour, there was no harbour, and they were trying to make something out of Dublin, but the packet boats, the Royal packet boats, the Royal Mail, used to attend to berth behind Ireland's Eye, because if a southeasterly gale came up, they had more chance of getting away, whereas if they were lying in Dalkey Sound, they were going to be driven into Dublin Bay. So the powers that be got it in their heads that Howth is where the packet boat harbour should be. So they set out to build a harbour. And this is Baldoyle, by the way. Even after Howth Harbour had been built, the fishermen of Baldoyle insist on saying there it was the main fishing harbour. This is Baldoyle about 1870. And not exactly a thriving fishing post, but nevertheless. They definitely had fishing boats worked there, and did so until in the 1920s. But anyway, they decided to build a harbour at Howth, and Howth House was originally built to be the residence for the engineer John Rennie. And in the way they were in those days, they cleared half a dozen fishermen's shacks away in order to build this rather splendid house, which is now the headquarters of the Olympic Council. But in 1875, Judge Boyd This is the harbour that Rennie built. It says surveyed 1837, but they obviously found nothing of interest because there are no figures on it, whatever. But what they found was it was just too shallow, and a great movement got going to build a harbour at Dunleary, which became Kingstown, the main ferry port just across the way. Okay, and there you see the ruination of Howth. They built a big harbour at Dunleary, which worked very well indeed. They connected it by rail in 1834, and the embarrassment of Howth, they tried to forget that Howth existed, but because it was government controlled, they wouldn't allow the fishermen at Baldor to use it. They wouldn't allow anybody to use it. It sat unused for about 20 years, and Howth became even more unfashionable, if that were possible, whereas Kingstown became the height of fashion. And anyway, they got a bit of sailing going in Howth eventually, and mostly though it was still just fishing boats trying to use a bit of it. This, I think, was a propaganda drawing to show that the steamers couldn't really get in and berth properly in Howth. It's sort of coming in at high water, buzzing around and going out again. It also shows that Howth Castle was a very peculiar looking setup in those days. But it still is, really, I suppose. They get it finished one day. But anyway, we could just go back. Eventually the government gave in after about 20 years of the place lying unused, and as the fishing industry was developing in Scotland. It was developing in Scotland because of the Highland clearances. The Scots had nothing left to do except take up fishing. They weren't allowed to be sheep farmers anymore. So the fishing fleets travelled. What Howth became is what they call, this is exciting, isn't it? And Howth became what was called a fishing station. Dunmore East was another one, and Castleton Bear and Killybegs. And the travelling fishing fleets, mainly from Cornwall and Scotland, used Howth in season. So this meant it was more or less blocked off for everything else. But gradually, notwithstanding this, they got the sailing going, and this is what Howth, you see, was like when the fishing fleets had moved on. And in 1857, we had the first known regatta here, and it was quite a big deal. And 1857, nice straightforward course, none of your multiple leg nonsenses and all that sort of thing. The only problem is there weren't any yachts in Howth, so we had to rely entirely on visitors. And there's the entry list for the Wednesday. And you will notice, it's rather sad this in some ways, you will notice a number of boats of the Royal Western Yacht Club, which is not the Royal Western Yacht Club of Plymouth, it's the Royal Western of Ireland Yacht Club from Kilrush. And up until about 1840, there were 18 fine yachts based in Kilrush. But with the famine, the great famine, gradually everything in the west of Ireland fell apart, and the few yachts that were still on the go came to the east coast. And they sort of struggled on. In fact, 1857 was the year when the Royal Western of Ireland Yacht Club more or less ceased business in Dunleary, and its members formed the Model Yacht Club, which eventually became the Royal Alfred Yacht Club, which even as we speak has disappeared into the Dublin Bay Sailing Club. Quite what we make of that, I don't know. They call it a reverse takeover, but I don't see Dublin Bay Sailing Club ever long except be called the Royal Alfred Yacht Club. But anyway, you look at the entries here, that's the entry on the first day. The second day, we have a bit of pure gold. This is an original document of the Rickard family. And we got this from Tom Rickard, and that's his great-great-great-great-granduncle, Stephen Rickard, is entered for the fishing smacks and wherries belonging to Howth, Baldoyle, Malahide, Rush and Skerries. You notice a conspicuous absence of the Clontarf fishing smacks, because they were a very rough bunch. nothing has changed really. It's really, this is 1857, but there is still no sort of Howth identity as a sailing centre until one Walter Boyd came along, and here he is. Judge Boyd, of a Scottish family obviously, but born in Dublin in 1833, and he was such a tremendous character that he's actually referenced in Joyce's Ulysses. I'm sure in your yearly reading of Joyce you will remember the bit where Leopold Bloom is thinking of going to visit his daughter Millie in Mullingar. And he has it all worked out how much it would cost, and it would be, he could just about afford it, and he said to himself, it wouldn't break Boyd's heart to go to Mullingar. Because when Boyd, he was the bankruptcy judge, and when he finally said, I have no choice in this matter, I'm going to have to put you into bankruptcy, which was pretty much like a sentence of death in those days, he used to say, it breaks my heart to do this. So this became a Dublin saying that if he could just about afford it, it wouldn't break Boyd's heart. And anyway, he's a fascinating man to look at. So anyway, he's a two-faced devil, because this is what the left-hand side of his face looks like. And you wouldn't like to be up against him in a dark courtroom. But if you look at the right-hand side of his face, he's about to burst out laughing. So, anyway, let's get the whole man again. Now, we'll stay back to the full page. He took a lease of Howth House in 1875, and this really started the presence of the Boyds. They had a very nice setup. He was doing very well in the legal business, and they lived in Merrion Square in the house which is now the French Embassy. And I think there's opportunities here for a diplomatic mission from Howth Yacht Club to the French Embassy. I think the French Embassy really needs to be told where the responsibilities lie in this direction. A lot of lavish hospitality for a legation from Howth wouldn't go amiss. Anyway, he lived in Merrion Square in the winter, what is now the French Embassy, and in the summer he lived out in Howth House. And he soon started having yachts, and the first one of any significance was the Howth, this cutter. You can see the judge himself standing on deck. This was about 1880. And he's looking aloft at the topsail and everything. And as you see, they've now got a few other yachts. In fact, Hal Sisk says one of those boats on the left is one of the famous Danzigs, which were imported from Poland, sort of in batch production in the 1840s. But anyway, that's the Howth, which was purpose-built for the judge to be a cruising yacht. And he gradually rose up the ranks. He was a member of the Royal Irish. He became flag officer of the Alfred. He'd had nothing to do, oddly enough, with the foundation of Howth Sailing Club, except that he fathered all the guys who did found it. But, which I suppose has something to do with it. But anyway, he was, as you might say, the father of the club. But anyway, after the Howth, his eldest son, Walter Herbert, was born in 1867, and at the age of 18, the judge by this stage had a boat called the Aideen, which you can now see just inside the pier there. This is what the Scottish fishing luggers are in and everything. This is classic Howth scene, actually. But his son Herbert was a very bright guy. And at the age of 18, he designed and built the Primula, which is in 1885. When you first see the Primula, you assume that she's an imitation of the water wags, but in fact the Primula came first. But anyway, as Brian Turvey has said, we have absolutely no photos of Herbert because he made the cameras, he didn't take selfies. So this is one taken actually just before he died in 1948, I beg your pardon. He's still Commodore Howth Yacht Club, that's him on the left, in pretty good shape for 83 years old or whatever it is. And Gerald Fitzgibbon on the right, who was the permanent honorary secretary of Howth Yacht Club, the man who controlled everything, or rather tried to. But anyway, Herbert, in 1885, designed and built the Primula and proved he was an absolute master craftsman. And he also made a camera. This is believed to be the earliest photo that he took, Howth Abbey. It's a very poor reproduction of it, but it's not bad for a 17-year-old with his own camera. And you can also see Howth lodges in place. Everything is actually as Howth should be instead of what it's like now. But over on the right, you see that Howth House has a very fine boathouse beside it. And yeah, there you go. And it just asked to be used for boat building. So his first effort was the Primula, and this is the design as taken off in William Prentice's boat shed in Mount Shannon, where she normally lives. She's a delightful little machine, as you've seen out on the landing there, and has lasted remarkably well. A very clever shape, because he wanted very much to have the double-ended type, which was all the rage in those days, and yet have the sufficient fullness aft for two people to sit side by side when she's being used for rowing. And she, that's what she looks like now. I can't even work out off the top of my head what age 1885 makes her, but it's not the day before yesterday. And Ian Malcolm gave her a lick of varnish, and has really brought her up very well indeed. And I must say, it's fantastic. This is the first boat that Boyd built. But meanwhile, his father was busy. Old Judge Boyd was really settling in now. He was very keen that Howth should do well. So he realized it needed dredging. And he must have been a bit like the Sean Dorn of his day, because he got the dredger sent out. And it made a heck of a difference to Howth. And he was able then to get comfortably in and out with his big catch 18. Now in 1889 we know he cruised 18 round Ireland. We don't know which way he went or anything like that. All we know is he definitely made the circuit. So he was one of the earliest cruises round Ireland. But this may explain the next item. We've the Howth Regatta programme from 1889 and the Howth Regatta programme from 1890. And on the left you can see practically nobody is involved in running it. John Jemison was from St. Marnox, and T.C. Burrows was Cosby Burrows from County Cavan, who seemed to be in everything to do with sailing. A relatively small committee, which looks like mostly like Dunleary or Kingstown types, sort of Bewleys or both, and the Worrell family were and that's probably the Molesworth Street. Where else? But anyway, there was nobody else involved locally. So we go to the end to 1890. Suddenly we find all the locals have got involved. In fact, there must have been more people on the committees than actually took part in the regattas. But this is sailing getting going in Howth, and then Judge Boyd decided that if sailing was really going to go, he was going to. John MacDonald just gone when I'm about to introduce his grandfather. In 1891, 1892, Judge Boyd took he lost the run of himself completely. He heard the English family of Glasgow wanted to sell their big boat Thalia. They claimed she was a Fife designed and built in 1891. They claimed all the new Watson designed boats were outclassing her. And so they sold her very cheap, and a very reasonable price. Judge Boyd snapped her up, and the Englishes were getting out of sailing so damn quickly that the Thalia came to Howth, complete with skipper Owen Bissett, who is the great-great-great-grandfather of John MacDonald, and therefore an ancestor of Ross MacDonald, who's winning everything. So it passed down through the family. But that was Owen Bissett, but the crew as well. They bought 3 or